Welcome to What a Word is Worth, space for creative minds to speak about viable ways to heal the world through writing and other inventive mediums. I am your host, Marianela Medrano, founder of Palabra Training Center, where words are giving us medicine. And my guest today is a beloved teacher, someone I've been dreaming to have this conversation with, Jeanne Corrigal, who has received training in many places, including the Spirit Rocks Community Dharma Leader Program and Insight Meditation Society, where she is a teacher, and she also leads the Saskatoon Insight Meditation Community. And she is a member of the Métis Nation, one of the few Indigenous communities recognized in Canada, sadly, because that means someone or so many are left out. But it's good that some have gained recognition. So welcome, Jeanne. Thank you for saying yes to this.
Oh, Marianela, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm so honored to be here with you and just feel my heart really, really just holding you and all the beautiful work that you do as well.
Thank you. So I have experienced, I was telling you, I have experienced your use of poetry. In fact, the very first time that I took an online class or was a gathering of BIPOC people, you did two things. You used poetry and you spoke about Thai, about Thich Nhat Hanh, and I was like, this is it. This is home. So, do you subscribe to this podcast's assertion or idea that words are healing balms, that words can heal? And what is your relationship with writing while mindful?
Oh, what a beautiful question, Marianela. And, just in the way you offer it, it's a balm, like turning to words is, I completely, fully support that. And I just feel the medicine in the way you speak about words. I love that you remembered that poetry. And one of the ways I often use words and poetry in my teaching and in my own life is to reflectively listen. And so I may not be a writer the way that you are and the way that our beloved poets are, but I want to say I'm one of the very appreciative people that read and take in poetry as a healing force.
Yeah.
And so very often in my teaching, I'll bring poetry and we'll reflectively listen to it at least 3 times. So I'll read it and then invite people to fill in, what phrase or word calls you in this. And then secondly, what is the invitation in this, invitation in any part of your life? And then thirdly, just sit with it silently. So in that way, it's a huge healer. And I thank you for bringing that in so strongly into the world.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I'm kind of picturing little you. How far back do you have to go to find you that was fascinated? Because, that tuning in, that listening, I'm imagining came from an experience that caught you. How far back do you have to go to fetch a moment of being fascinated with writing or with an author?
You ask the best questions. What flashed into my mind was listening through music when I was about 10, 11 years old to Cat Stevens, the song Peace Train.
Oh, yeah.
And I would listen to that over and over and over. And it just reaffirmed in my heart the possibility of peace.
Yeah.
Other songs like that, mostly folk singers I grew up with, Joan Baez, Peter, Harry Belafonte,
Yes.
those singers
Yeah.
whose healing words have touched so many hearts.
I was gonna say those are healers. Those are I mean John Baez really changed the world with her songs. And I'm thinking also someone who just left this plane, I think it was yesterday or the day before, Chris Christopherson, who is along that family of healers who really revolutionized the world with their
Absolutely.
music. Yeah.
I've been listening to his music ever since he passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's but it's, you know, as I said when Ty passed on, these are the kind of humans who never leave. They stay with us.
Yes.
They, you know, as they are buried or whatever ceremony is done, it's like they ascend and stay with us. So yeah. So talk to us about your experience with your Indigenous community and particularly your teacher, um, Jim Settee. Is that how you said his name? I know that I have read and I think I heard you speak, well, many times speak about his influence. What are the ways in which you feel you are carrying on the transmissions, the legacy?
Marianella, thank you for bringing him in. You know, I feel my heart, you know, after our beloveds and, you know, our elders die from this physical plane, as you say, they're still here, aren't they? We continue to have relationship with them.
Yeah.
And I feel that since Jim passed from this physical plane, he and I have still been working together. And so in a way, you know, I feel like we're carrying, his legacy gets to carry on. He's still here, but I'm just the person on the physical plane that's got the honor of offering it. And so the ways I've tried to continue working with him and carry on his legacy are through making the film about him. Our national television broadcaster, Aboriginal television network. And so I made that film, finished it in 2009, and then toured. And really, the elders are involved in this somehow. The night of the premiere, someone was in the audience from a cultural organization, and they invited me to tour with them. And so I toured for 10 years then in schools across the province. So for 10 years, his teaching got to get out there.
So you were taking on the road, basically.
On the road across Saskatchewan, Manitoba to about over 350 schools, over 35,000 people got to hear his legacy. And the children's drawings from that time really touched my heart. And then I finished that in 2019. And right after that, then one of the funders of those tours asked if we could put the film and some of the stories that I've told around it on their website. So very soon, his film and the stories I would tell in schools will be on their learning website, Gabriel Dumont Institute. And so then teachers and schools will be able to access it there. And so I feel so good about that, Marianella. His legacy can continue to be used by teachers and the general public. And right now, the first step that they did was they put the film on YouTube. So the film itself is available on YouTube, and within a few months, it'll be contextualized in 4 ways. We'll offer a context for teachers to use it with elementary schools, high school grades, and then also a context for general audience, adult audience. So we hope that it'll continue to get.
So it will be available on YouTube and also the Institute, but also YouTube will carry it. So it's easier for people to.
Yeah, YouTube carries it right now. I could send you the link when we're done.
Okay.
It has the film. And then what Gabriel Dumont Institutes will do is put it on their learning website with the context of, we'll put some of the children's drawings on there from the 10 years of touring. And we'll put
That's
little lesson
beautiful.
plans on for elementary school and small video clips of me introducing the film and telling stories.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So when you look back, how old were you when you started working with him or following him?
Yeah, no, in a way, it's been my entire life from when I was a baby, because
Uh-huh.
Jim knew me as a baby.
Okay.
My dad and he worked together.
Uh-huh.
And then both our families moved away to work at different places.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on stories of Jim Settee from my dad
Mm-hmm.
because he loved Jim Settee. So
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on stories. And then when I was about 25, Marianella, I got the opportunity to meet him in person
Mm-hmm.
as an adult. And you can imagine, he was talking on First Nation and Métis history. And in the town I grew up in. And I went up, I felt like I was meeting a legend out of a book. And I went up to him afterwards. I said, Mr. Settee, you won't remember me, but I'm one of Andy and Dorothy's daughters. And he took my hand, Marianella,
Mm-hmm.
and he held it. I could still feel how soft his hands were and how warm, and he had a twinkle in his eye. And he said to me,
Mm-hmm.
are you Jeannie? I said,
You
yes, I
remembered.
remembered. He
Mm-hmm.
did that with everyone. And
Mm-hmm.
so true. And then we started working together more. And
Mm-hmm.
then and I visited him more. And then we started to make the film together. He
So
died very,
okay. So he was also, it's not the film, it's not a collection of things, but he was part of it
well,
initially.
initially he was. I got the
Uh-huh.
funding and I called him up. I went to see him. I took blueberries and we had a feast. I said, Jim, do you want to make a movie about you?
Hmm.
And he said, sure. And I had the music already in my head. I played it for him. He liked it. We planned his um, interview for June. This was about March that I
Mhm.
talked with him. We planned his interview for June. Marianella, he died in May.
Wow.
Yes.
So, wow.
And so
Mhm.
that pushed me into
Mhm.
a different way of doing the film. So
Mhm.
I did the film with his community telling the story of him. He does appear in the film
Mhm.
because I had interviewed him already for a previous film I had
Uh,
made about women's history in
uh-huh.
the area that
Uh-huh.
I live. First Nation, Métis, and Euro-Canadian women's history and their common connection, spiritual connection to the land.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had some footage of him, but no current
But
footage.
he didn't. Right, right. Wow. And when you look back at the transmissions, right, that you have um, kept more closely to your heart, what are some transmissions that you can share with us? I know one of the things that I loved about your teacher is your appreciation of joy and how you tend to walk us through finding the small joys. Does that come from him and your sense of humor? Because you have a beautiful, cute sense of humor.
Oh, thank you, Marianella. Thank you so much.
It's,
You know, Jim did have both of those things.
okay.
And of course, it was important for him because, well, and the community, the Métis community, and all Indigenous communities and communities that have oppression and racism, because
Mhm.
those are two of the ways that the community is sustained
Mhm.
through knowing those quiet joys, the quiet joy of
Yeah.
community, the quiet joy
Mhm.
of nature,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then the humor is a huge thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
maybe I would say that the biggest transmission I got from him was the connection between telling the truth of how it is
Uh-huh.
and kindness,
Uh,
seeing clearly with kindness.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That might be one of the biggest, because he would name things like racism,
Mhm.
injustice with truth. He would talk about it truthfully.
So truth and kindness as a bird, right? Like birds, wings of the same bird, kind of.
Yes, kindness and inclusivity, no one left out of the solution. And he would talk to, all cultures that way. So I think that's one of the biggest transmissions. And also, Marianella, whenever I sit on the cushion in mindfulness, he sits with me because he had that huge, kind heart.
That he knows stillness.
He knew stillness like in every bone in his body, and kindness in every bone in his body. Yes, I don't know if I told you this story of the lost boy.
Yes.
He
Do you wanna give a brief
I'll give a brief
synopsis of that? Because I remember as a very, very powerful story. Last time I heard it was when we held the BIPOC retreat. Yeah.
Right, of course. Well, he was a renowned tracker that could, of course, find people that were lost in the bush, and he was often called to do that. And one time after the community had looked for 2 days, they couldn't find a young boy, so they called him. And he came and found that boy within 2 hours. And when he sat with that boy, I asked him, what happened when you sat with him? And I said, how did you find him? He said, when I look for any lost person, I put myself in the mind of the person who's lost. I said, what did you do when you found that boy? And he said, when I found that boy, he was out of his mind with fear. And I just sat with him quietly for half an hour till he could come back inside himself. And so that's where I got the transmission, Marianella, of this connection between mindfulness and kindness. Sitting together, especially in difficult circumstances. That's what brings us home.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And I just took a retreat with Sanjo Earthling Manuel and her book on Opening to Darkness. And one of the things that she spoke there is very relevant to what you were saying just now, that she spoke about if we think so many things scare us. So fear is something that is always with us. But if we take the F out of fear, we get ear, an invitation to listening, right? And then we can explore and enter curiosity and kindness and mindfulness. So as you were saying that, I'm like, listening, the ability to listen mindfully, that we cannot do if we are paralyzed by fear. But he was able to hold that boy.
Hold that boy in that kindness. And
that kindness.
When he said, also this connects with the teaching on fear that you just shared, that, when we're frightened, we get reactive and we get tired and we're trying really hard and we get more and more stuck in the stage. If we can do what he did, which is put ourselves in our own mind, we can pick up our own track, our own trail, and that can lead us to where we are often paralyzed in fear or stuck in something, and then we can bring in that deep, kind listening.
The listening, which, that's what healers do, right? True healers. Is to listen. And I think, yes, I can, as someone who has experienced your teaching, I can say that you are a good listener, and his legacy moves on. And that's beautiful that he sits with you, when you, there is so much. I cannot separate the Indigenous way from mindfulness. It's inseparable. It's one contains the other, right?
That's how I feel as well, Marianella.
Yeah.
I might say that Indigenous way, that Buddhism is a way of since the Indigenous way has been here for so much longer, I tend to see that as the large container, and
Yes,
Buddhism as a way of
systematizing, maybe, because the many systems of Buddhism.
Yes, of offering something in addition or within that umbrella. That's kind of the way I hold it.
Yeah. It made so much sense to me when I first encountered, mindfulness and Buddhism, various schools, because then it speaks to me. But other schools also, because it's the same language. I mean, it's the perennial wisdom, right, that gets transmitted. But I like what you're saying, that mindfulness or Buddhism has kind of the systems then that can help us, I guess, frame the wider system that is older. Yeah. So in the wisdom of interbeing that Thich Nhat Hanh so much, he brought it to us, to the world. And you illustrate that concept for our audience, how you have embodied or how you see interbeing as being the way, right? To build community, to support, to understand, to reorient, right? To envision. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but.
Marianella, thank you so much for this question. And we share such a love for Thich Nhat Hanh, such a love.
Yeah, it was.
You know what comes to my mind right away is an example from the Indigenous community, Métis community. And that is because yesterday we just had here Orange Shirt Day, which is a day of commemoration for residential school survivors. And there's a lot of events across our city here in Saskatoon, and we also had a celebration of this in June to mark National Indigenous Day, June 21st. And what I think of when you ask for some way of illustrating this is a sense of that celebration, and specifically the round dance. End of it. So at these celebrations, we have, and the Métis community that I belong to is a big organizer of these, and there's always invited Métis people from the residential school experience, survivors, First Nations, and also non-Indigenous people, particularly people who might be, leaders in the community or leaders in the church communities who ran the residential schools. They all speak about healing and about what they've learned, especially the non-Indigenous people speak about with great humility about what they've learned, how they've worked with the responsibility, the accountability. But one elder, Eugene Arcand, at one of these gatherings said, we're all here to lay down the shame and the guilt. We're all here to heal. And so after that, we had a round dance. They had a round dance. So there was 500 people, all holding diverse cultures. And the drum is drumming, the drum in the middle of this circle, and 500 people needs a spiral, not a circle. So we were spiraling into this little valley and hills around. You could see everywhere, this whole hillside alive with this spiral dancing. And this dance of it is the dance of interconnection, and that celebration is the celebration of our interconnection. Same way Jim Settee would speak the truth and then involve everybody in the solution. No one left out. We're not separate solid selves. We are completely interconnected. No one blamed. Everyone in on the solution in this vast dance of interconnection, this vast dance of emptiness, this vast dance of no separate self. And so that round dance for me is an illustration of the teaching of interconnection and how we can come together in that truth, still honoring the truth of residential
Truth.
school pain,
Right, right,
but also honoring the larger, the spiritual truth that we're all in this together, no one separate.
right,
To me is a
right,
profound, the way the Indigenous elders offer that is a profound
right.
teaching of that interconnection. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Because what I'm thinking is and I didn't know that you included some of the, I guess, administrators of the schools
Yep.
who are still around.
Yep.
They too are our relations, right?
Yes.
And then if we left them out, if we shame them or blame them, is blaming ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Because they are a part of us. It's like this indra's net, right? So one reflects the other. So how many of the survivors on both ends, students and are they teachers, administrators, like a mixture?
They're a mixture.
Mhm.
One event I recall, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission traveled
Mhm,
across Canada,
mhm,
they took 6 years to
mhm.
travel, and
Yeah.
they would have large gatherings. And I went to one of those gatherings for the weekend, and they had a lot of the descendants of the church administrators there,
Mhm,
the
mhm,
descendants of all the various
mhm,
churches that ran those residential schools, and they had government
mhm,
officials there who were descendants of the
mhm.
the officials at that time, and they were there as representatives. And they had then on in the center of many circles, residential school survivors telling their stories, and all of these hundreds of church people witnessing and listening.
Yeah. The
And
power of stories, the power of
power of
words.
words,
Yes.
power of words.
Yeah.
One of the commissioners, Mary Sinclair, I think it was, or another, perhaps Eugene Arcand, one of the elder,
Mm, mhm.
explained that there were Kleenexes all throughout the auditorium and also in the small rooms where they had smaller circles of residential school survivors telling.
Mhm,
And he said, anyone who uses those Kleenexes, please pass them down. We have big
mhm,
places for you to put them.
mhm.
We'll save them. They saved all the Kleenexes, all the tears of everyone who shed tears in
Yeah.
that whole weekend and burned them in a ceremony at the end.
Oh, wow.
Everyone's tears.
That is so symbolic. And again, such an illustration of this concept of interbeing and interconnectivity and everyone being a relative, right?
Yeah,
They're all
everyone.
our relations.
Everyone, all our
Yeah.
nations, and Indigenous communities here in this part of the world have maintained those teachings.
Mm-hmm.
Colonialization for
Mm-hmm.
150 years of really
Mm-hmm.
severe
Mm-hmm.
colonialization.
Mm-hmm.
They're still true to those teachings,
Mm-hmm.
and these teachings are the Buddhist teachings.
Yes, exactly. That's you. I can't tell them apart because
Mhm.
it's saying the same thing. And I think, going back to Thich Nhat Hanh, he really saw that and so beautifully married
Yeah,
these concepts and was such an example, right? Like I've always said, if he could do it, then I must be able to do it in terms of holding complexity. Because this idea, right, the truth and reconciliation, what it means to sit, let's say, with the perpetrators,
yep.
right, and do it not from blaming, not from shaming, but from from kindness and I guess the desire to understand
Mhm.
and accept what happened without saying, it's okay, keep doing it to us,
Yeah.
right? And so important that to celebrate this because the time is passing, right? So we're in a decade, we might not have survivors anymore to tell the story firsthand,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Although in Canada, the residential schools actually were here until the 1990s. So
That's true.
yeah.
So we still have, yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, back to your point about Thich Nhat Hanh just being an embodiment for the world of these beautiful teachings of interconnection and the power of words, because he was such a poetic writer.
He was, and he left this poetry for us. I mean, Call Me by My True Names is a book that to me is the best book on healing that I can offer anyone. It's just to pull a poem from there and just share. The wisdom of interbeing is in that book.
That's for sure.
So what other kind of clips can you give us about this encounter of the the remembrance of what happened in the residential schools and what you have seen as communities come together? Can you think of other things to share with us in terms of how you have seen this concept of interbeing, the sense of we all belong. It doesn't matter what we have done, right? Which is such a, I mean, for me, it's something that I keep coming back, because when you think about the current climate, political climate, right, with what's happening in Haiti, in Gaza, in Sudan, in the United States, as we approach election, it's so important to remember that. And also, how do we do it with grace? How do we say to someone who can be capable of inflicting so much pain with words, with actions, with deeds, how do we hold it as your teacher did it, with kindness and truth?
Yes. Oh, Marianella, you are just bringing this totally where we need to, which is right into this present day. We can see how words are inflaming hatred.
Yes.
So
Yes.
directly.
Right.
Here's a few things that come to mind. A teacher of mine asked an Indigenous elder once, how do you do it? How do you sustain through all this racism, through all this hatred, through all this ill will? And in a way, this is exactly what you're pointing to right now. You know, what that elder told her was he takes a long view. In fact, he told her,
long view.
I take a 100-year view. So, wow, that's a big view.
Yes.
But in a way, that's what the elders here have done, with contact, with reserves, with really the rise in racism so starkly here in Canada around 1850, 1860, 1870. They've taken the long view ever since then. Never wavered from the teachings. And, think of Dalai Lama and what he has described in terms of the suffering that he and his community have suffered with the invasion of Tibet. Talking about what it is how does he sustain? He talks a lot about compassion. Never losing compassion for the perpetrators.
Right.
That protects our own heart.
Right.
But, in the context of the hatred that's happening in our communities now, this is where I think we just need to keep speaking the truth inclusively. So here, for example, in Canada, we have, I will say, a provincial government that is inciting hatred, for example, towards many people, immigrants, transgender people.
Yes, right.
So we are trying in our small community. So we're just raising transgender, we're lifting the transgender community up in whatever way we can. We're talking about the transgender community in our Sangha. We're bringing in transgender teachers.
as they were held, right, before colonization.
Yes, yes, yes.
So that's
Two
that
spirit.
long view.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The two-spirit, Indigenous two-spirit way,
Yes.
yes, was held before colonization. We have
Mhm.
who can come and speak to that. And then the
Mhm.
transgender reality or the transgender community, a little bit different than that.
Mhm.
But we want to hold them both up. And so we just we bring as much attention, here's one person I heard said, we energize what's going to be needed in the future. In the dark, dark times, we energize what's going to be needed in the future. So this is where we place our energy. Venerable Nalio said, we need to embody that which would heal the world. Our job is to embody that which would heal, even in the midst of the hatred. And we can never lose sight of that.
Yes. Yes.
So that's our job. And it's to not get overwhelmed or try if overwhelm and despair visit, which they did to Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yes.
That his greatest fear was giving into despair.
And
And so it's to really bring our mindfulness practice to be able to stand in, be with the pain of it. Just like the ceremonies around residential school survivors, they see the pain of it. And Thich Nhat Hanh spoke the pain of things. I remember being at a retreat with him. We talked about climate crisis. And he just laid it out there for all of us. So I think speaking the truth, being aligned with what we know is true, according to our values of non-harming, then energizing that as much as we can. And taking quiet joy, quiet nourishment from the daily moment-to-moment nourishment we can get now from the various sources of quiet joy in our lives, which are accessible now. This is how we nourish the 100-year view. The Resistance Revival Chorus, that beautiful song, This Joy.
Yes.
They talk about joy as an act of resistance.
As an act of resistance. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Wow. So many things are like, I want to go back to the residential school, but I also want to really kind of take in this long view, 100 years long view, because that's the view that will show us what we call resilience. That is not just like, I forgive you. It's not that simple, but it's the seeing how we belong, right? And the leaning on the earth. Like if we want more resilience, look at the earth. And so 100 years long view will show us everything that has resisted perishing under harsh circumstances, including, the earth, the climate issues, to the things that we can do against one another.
Yes.
So that's,
And that 100-year view brings us into the qualities of patience, into the qualities of resilience, into the qualities of we're in this for the long haul.
Yes, exactly. And we better lean on our ancestry, on those memories to be able to gain the fortitude to do it, because it's we are imperfect, right? So we are going to continue making mistakes, and politicians are going to be politicians.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And I guess want to just clarify that the 100-year view doesn't mean that we postpone our joy and happiness.
No, I know. I hear that loud and clearly. So going back to what you were saying, that the last residential school was closed in 1990, but what is the difference though? Because what I was thinking was the people who, when was hush, 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 and no one was saying anything, right? And this what is the word I'm looking, this hideous actions were being perpetrated, right? But once was out, I mean, it took all that for the last one to be closed. And I will say what I think about that. I'm not so sure, because as a therapist, I see so many people who are put in boarding schools these days, especially BIPOC people, and I'm not so sure it's over, right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying, what
Yeah.
is the difference if you think about in the 90s and the first time when, the discoveries and the first alarm was sounded? What do you think was the difference? What was alleviated, if anything,
Yeah.
in that period that allowed them to be held until that point? The schools, I mean.
Oh, to be held until that point.
Mhm. What do you think allowed
Yeah, I think that that it did take until the 70s, 80s for the Indigenous voices to have enough influence. I mean,
Uh-huh.
Indigenous people were protesting and lobbying since the beginning of the treaties, and protesting and lobbying consistently for the treaty rights, for Métis, fair treatment for the Métis people. So they've been lobbying constantly. However, it was only in the 1960s that they could gather legally in groups. B, they could legally leave the reserves. C, that the racism towards the Métis who couldn't live on the reserves began to abate a little bit so that they could begin to actually have a chance at employment. And then also they were able to legally go to school, higher education, I should say, in the 1960s, which they couldn't prior to that without forfeiting their Indigenous status.
Yes.
So these were ways that the government kept them quiet, kept them down. They couldn't legally hire legal counsel. Before 1960s, Indigenous people couldn't do that. What happened in the 60s was when they could legally, by that I mean go to university without status,
Without
they started to go
disguising.
to law school. And then the Indigenous people started to bring the courts, bring the government of Canada into legal action. And that's what finally changed, or one of the factors that finally changed this. And also the rising Indigenous voice for self-determination around education began to rise more clearly in those decades. And so then they began to get day schools on the reserves, which was a treaty promise in the beginning. So I think in the 60s, when those conditions changed, in the 70s, and then voices got really louder, so in the 70s, 80s, that was a few shifting decades.
So the liberation too, because it was a liberation, right? To be able to prepare ourselves to be active members and agents of change out there. It took it was a slow inside, talking about inside meditation. It was an inside movement that was happening until then individuals were able to enact action and resistance. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, the saddest thing is, like what I'm saying, when I hear the BIPOC people I work with who are undergoing, especially those from disadvantaged financial status, who are brought in to boarding schools under scholarships. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, some of the hideous things are now being perpetrated, like sexual abuse and all, but the abuse continues. It's almost like, the old frame is still being held.
Yeah.
It's like the human nature. It takes us 100 years to make this tiny change.
Yes, yeah, it's definitely true that racism and all of these power dynamics are still in place.
Still in place.
No
Still
doubt
in
about it.
place. Yeah. So one last thing, I can spend the whole day talking to you, but in the context of what we're saying, Joanna Macy has so beautifully extended an invitation to us to practice active hope, which she described as a practice, something we do, a process we can apply to any situation, the active hope. And she talks about active hope as something that doesn't necessarily requires optimism, but intention. So I'm just thinking about this in the context of what we are just saying about this history. And I see you as someone who embodies active hope and practices righteous indignation without getting eaten up. um, I don't know. I see you as that, as someone who so graciously speaks the truth. And you know what you were saying about your teacher withholding kindness and the truth, I can see what a good student you are. So can you say more about how this active hope is kind of embodied, or examples? I mean, you gave a bunch of them just now. We were kind of, but I just want to see if you can expand a little bit more in the context of active hope.
Oh, beautiful, Marianella, beautiful. You know, I love the feeling that we're kindred spirits, because Joanna Macy, of course, is also one of my beloved elders.
Yeah,
And her active hope work, or her work that reconnects, has four. I love it. In fact, I use this framework quite a lot. It has 4 steps. The first is gratitude. The second is honoring our pain.
Yeah.
Third is seeing with new eyes. And the fourth is going forth.
Yeah.
And so gratitude, that's that sense of connecting with quiet joy, with humor, community, always feeling, always connecting with that inner wellspring that can sustain. And so that's, for me, connects with what we've been talking about.
That's medicine.
As medicine. As medicine.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And then secondly, honoring our pain for the world. So that's saying the truth about it.
Yeah.
Really saying the truth about it. About climate crisis, about racism, about whatever it is. And we need to develop the mindfulness skills in order to turn to that with steadiness and equanimity. And then when we honor that pain, then we spend less energy running away from it. We spend less energy in despair. We spend less energy in overwhelm. So that then we can see the world with new eyes.
Yeah.
That third step.
Yeah.
We can see the world through these teachings. And see, oh, there's a possibility of me working in an engaged way through the teaching of interconnection for the good of all beings, without falling into collapse, with telling the truth. So there's a way to do it.
Yeah.
And then lastly, going forth, we go and do it.
Yes.
So,
action.
Action, absolutely. And Bob Brown, who's a wonderful environmental activist in Australia, a recent film was made about him called The Giants, I think was The Giants, about saving the forest in Australia. He said what saved him from depression about climate and about the other issues in the world was quiet joy and action.
Yeah.
So that's such an important part. We have to act.
Yes.
And act in community.
Yeah.
And then that's touching us into the nourishment of now, what we can touch and be nourished by now. And interrupt some of the spiral thinking into despair. Even if we don't know, we can't guarantee the outcome, which Thich Nhat Hanh talked about so clearly. We don't know the outcome, but that did not stop him from a lifetime of activism.
Of engagement. Yes. Totally. That is so beautiful. Yes, and so true. Like reinforcing with gratitude, which is what, I tell when I teach mindful writing. The way I have kind of conceived my particular approach leans on the four Brahma Viharas. But I tell people, we can write beautiful things and all cute and spiritual or whatever they come out. But if they're not followed with actions. So that that engaged portion, which is so well put together in Joanna Macy's work. It's action. It's action.
And, maybe to just draw one more parallel back to Buddhism, her 4 steps really are the Four Noble Truths.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the first one of gratitude, the Buddha always gladdened the mind of people before giving a teaching. And that means teaching into whatever quiet joy is here. And then her second one, honoring the pain, that's the first noble truth.
Yes, absolutely.
We acknowledge.
Yeah.
And then the second and third, the second noble truth is if we get lost in despair. But the third noble truth is if we can see with new eyes, there is a way to do it differently.
Yeah.
And then the fourth noble truth is the going forth. It's the
Eightfold Path. That's the action. Yeah. That's so beautifully said and written by her. But we get the benefit then of these teachers, and I for certain have benefited from your teachings. So I thank you for that. Is there anything you want to say in closing, something that I didn't ask that you want our audience to know or expand on any of the things?
Maybe just to put a little underline on that. I think that our mindfulness skills and our kindness skills are the skills we need to cultivate in order then to cultivate our resilience and then move into wise action in the world. Many people that come, like around climate crisis, for example, talk about what can we do, and of course we need to do something, but to develop those skills that Thich Nhat Hanh had, the Dalai Lama has, of being able to be steady with the truth of how it is, that Jim Settee had, that the elders have, that we would develop these skills, and that's what can sustain our engagement in the world.
Yeah. Yes. Beautifully said. I feel like I can stay here for the entire, but we'll come back at another time and have part 2 of this conversation, I hope. Thank you, Jeanne, for generously sharing your time with us. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you.
Thank you, Marianella. It's such a delight to be here connected with you, held in the embrace of your beautiful work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to What a Word is Worth. You can access today's interview at Spotify, YouTube, and other platforms. And if you are interested, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. And if you like this program, you find it beneficial, then leave us a review. I am with you in love and compassion, always, always, always.